Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and also to the 755 people who are joining us on the live stream. My name is Kevin Ryan. I'm the president of the PNF Association. Thank you very much for supporting our parent engagement events, and you're going to hear some great information tonight. I read recently that a great measure of our self-esteem is being able to look back on life and be happy with the choices that we've actually made. And I think if we can help our sons and our daughters to be able to make better choices, then we're going to feel much more satisfied in our role as parents. I just have one other thing to mention. Those of you who are very keen on watching the Facebook page will have noticed that we also mentioned we're going to be launching tonight a great initiative, actually started by Tanya Anderson, down the back there. One of the things that we've heard from the PNF is that we have a lot of resources for people to connect in the PNF, but people can't always know what they are or find where they are. And so in an area that you will all be familiar with, called Padua. You're all familiar with that, aren't you? Please nod. Yes. In there is now a new little window that you can tap on live now called Padua Parent Groups. In there you will find one section which is all the PNF information, our great new initiative with student representative grants. The criteria are there. The form to be able to put in an application is there, and other initiatives that we'll be bringing in will be there as well. And this will continue to grow. It will also incorporate all the links to the marvellous Padua supporters group, those who help our sporting students, and also for the Padua members of the FCIP. So all of the things that parents need to be able to find are going to be in one place for you. It's not complete yet, but it's launched tonight. Keep watching it. And as I said, anytime you want to know how can I connect with either my year group or with the broader community, go there and there'll be a link there to take you there straight away. I'd like to acknowledge our pastoral care Vice Rector, Christy Watkins, who has been absolutely brilliant in identifying the sort of topics we need to focus on here as parents. And so I'd like to introduce and welcome Christy to the stage, who's going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Please welcome Christy.
Good evening, parents and carers, both in person and online. For the first time this evening, we're live streaming the Parent Engagement Evening. As you would remember from last term, we did a totally online evening, but tonight we're doing both in person and online. Firstly, I'd like to thank the PNF for their support of the Parent Engagement Evenings throughout the entire year, and the many other functions you have hosted and contributed to. Mr. Peter Elmore has asked for me to pass on his thanks for such a valuable contribution the PNF makes to college life. Peter also passes on his apologies for this evening as he has a board meeting. This evening we have the pleasure of hosting Michael and Tony from the Good Choice Project. Unfortunately, we only have Michael at the moment. Michael will explain that in a moment. The Good Choice Project is a not-for-profit organisation. The Good Choice Project is about educating young people on social issues they will encounter as they navigate adolescence to adulthood, and to provide them with an education on making good choices for a better future. When researching some stats yesterday afternoon, as an educator and as a mum, it's a little bit hard to digest some of these stats. More than 23,000 secondary students aged between 12 and 17 years participated in the Australian Secondary Students Alcohol and Drug Survey. The results show 50% reportedly tried alcohol and 16 had reportedly tried cannabis. When we just look at our general statistics on gambling, Australians bet more than $242 billion each year. 39% of the population are regular gamblers. Media also reports that the use of e-cigarettes among non-smokers aged 18 to 24 years has quadrupled in just 6 years, from 5% in 2013 to 20% in 2019. The Good Choice Project aims to help youth in local communities around Australia to understand the risks they will face through adolescence. Their aim is to equip them, and tonight you, with practical and effective strategies to navigate their way safely to adulthood. As mentioned, hopefully tonight we have two presenters. Firstly, we have Michael. Michael has nearly 30 years of experience in child protection cases, investigation and education. He's served with distinction as a detective with the Queensland Police Service for 20 years, investigating child abuse offences, being awarded the Assistant Commissioner's Award for dedication to child protection. If Tony is able to come from the job that he's on at the moment, Tony has seen the worst of the drug culture and organised crime that underpins it. In the 30 years of strategic and tactical covert drug operations, he has been critically involved in and directed countless drug operations, many of which have resulted in high-profile, intensive media coverage. These investigations include matters of national and international operational basis. Tony has also had cause to assist in drug-connected murder investigations. Tony educates people on illicit drug culture and what they are unwittingly choosing to be part of and support when they take drugs. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael. This is Tony. No, he's not here. Tony, unfortunately, is still in the police, and duty does call every now and then, and there was a major operation that was closed down today that he's still tied up on. I spoke to him before. He's made his way to headquarters in the city, so hopefully he will be here to add a little bit and answer any more questions around the drug side of things. The good thing is, with 20 years in the police, I know most of the stuff around the drugs anyway, so that shouldn't be a problem about me asking any of your questions. And I guess all about tonight is making sure that we can equip you in a way of you understanding what our youth are facing in the communities around, not just about drugs, because I'll show you some facts and figures shortly, but we know that what alcohol and tobacco and illicit drugs, the use of the ages between 13 and 17 is actually dropping. It's the risk-taking that's increasing. So the vaping, using prescribed medication, using different types of steroids is definitely something that's increasing and putting children in vulnerability. And the other thing is gambling, because we're seeing young people get themselves in a huge amount of debt. Nothing like being put on the spot straight away. It's on again. And that wasn't me. Everybody saw my hands were nowhere near it. So basically tonight we're just going to have a look at you understanding about it. Doesn't matter what our children are doing. They are like everybody, they're individuals, and it's really, really important that we understand that, and how you navigate your way of creating relationships with children will eventually provide your child the best safety they can at risk-taking. Every person has some sort of risk-taking in their history, and you'll take risks tomorrow. So it's important that we understand that we don't want people wrapping children up in cotton wool. It's about us making sure that we're giving them the right choices at the right time to make sure that, that harm minimisation process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. One thing I want to do straight away is just getting everybody really to understand the importance for everybody to understand the way our brain conditions us to see and do things continuously. Basically for those, I really enjoy reading about how our brain works and all those sort of things, and basically what I can tell you is basically that our brain's not big enough to comprehend everything that our eyes and ears pick up every second of every day. So basically what happens is your brain creates subconscious behaviours. So if you do something often enough, the brain doesn't have to think about how to respond to that, it just tells your body how to respond to it. And everybody is different. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what I mean by that, I want everybody to watch the screens. I'm going to chuck a colour up on the screen. And as soon as you see the colour, I want you to tell me what colour it is. You ready? Go. So usually when I play this game, I heard red. I definitely don't see red up there, but anyway. Green, or sometimes I see white. I hear somebody yell out white. Now, if you said red, your brain has conditioned you to read first before you see anything else. Okay, if you saw green first, your brain is conditioned you to see colour or shape first. That's why most important things in our world aren't just a shape, aren't just a colour, aren't just a symbol. They come with word, shape, and colour. So stop signs, give way signs are perfect examples of that. So it's really important that you understand that. If you said white, you're just being difficult, and we'll move on, all right? So do you want to do this again? Okay, so watch this, all right? And be honest, as soon as you see the colour, yell out what colour you see. So don't think about it. You ready? Go. No one yelled out. So most people, I heard green, some people might say red, but it is a subconscious behaviour that you cannot change, all right? So it's really, really important that you understand that children are different, and it's really, really important that you think about fundamentally how that is going to impact upon you. I guess what I'm going to touch on very quickly is just the types of substances that can be misused. So obviously there's a whole variety of them. I'll just get the next slide. There we go. So basically we class them into 7 sort of areas. So we have alcohol, tobacco, inhalants, medication, energy drinks, performance enhancement, and illicit substances. And obviously we can add 1,000 other things to that when we talk about risk by children. We can talk about gambling. We can talk about, I talk about that not being in a good mental health space is a risk. All of those things can catapult children to make poor choices at poor times. But obviously I can't cover off on everything, so I'm just going to paint a picture for you now, what we know about children firstly before we move on. The first thing I can tell you is that we're seeing some dynamics in figures and what we know about our communities that are quite alarming. So if we look at children up to the age of 12 years of age, so now within our communities at the moment, we know children aged between 6 months of age and 12 years of age spend more time awake with somebody else other than their own family. So when you think about early childhood, outside school hour care, normal scare, most children spend more time awake with somebody else than their own home. What is occurring is basically we're institutionalising children a little bit to understand that basically home is not normal, all right? Being around involvement, having direction, and feeling continuously safe is something that they see as normal. Now the problem is that when we include what we know about our community, so to give you a bit of a snapshot where we are as a community, as Australia, we have the highest divorce rate than any other westernised country in the world at the moment. We sit at about 62% of all marriages in Australia end up in divorce. We know that we have the highest use of ice per capita than any other country in the world. We have the highest use of cocaine per capita, the 3rd highest use of cocaine per capita than any other country in the world. We have one of the highest uses of illicit and prescribed drugs. We sit in the top 15 users of alcohol. We have one of the highest mental health and suicide rates in the world. And just to top it off, since COVID, our domestic violence rates of reporting has gone from 1 in every 10 homes in Queensland to 1 in every 7 homes. So what that means is basically children aged between 0 and 12, when they're at home, a majority of children at home, because of those figures, are in some sort of what we call trauma-based behaviour. Now, trauma-based behaviour means that they don't have a cognitive and emotional ability to engage with what's going on in their world, which you see as your normal world, but their normal world is in the educational screen. And it's really important as adults we understand that. And the reason why we want you to understand that is that those ages between 13 and 17, we are seeing a huge gap. So what I mean by that is that children risk-taking around those figures when we talk about drugs, alcohol, smoking, the figures from 15 years ago has actually dropped. But the problem is it's escalated from ages 18 to 24 to dramatic numbers that are very, very concerning. And the reason behind that is many, but we're going to have a look at some of them so you understand that how that ages between 13 and 17 is really, really important for the development of teenagers to make sure that they combat that 18 to 24-year-old world. Now, one thing that we can talk about when we talk about that age group is that from your perspective as a parent, they don't look for you for answers. When we talk about that pecking order, children aged between 13 and 17, the most important things to them are acceptance and everything being justified. All right, and they look to their peers for that. Their number one person they look to is their peers. Number two is their teachers and coaches. And then if they don't find the answers there, they might lean on a parent. And the realisation is that they don't see a parent as somebody that they have to have inclusion with. They don't see that they have to gain anything from you because you've always been there. All right? And it's important that we understand that's the way teenage world works. So we have to look at unique ways of us being able to provide information to children so they actually listen to us. And it's not easy. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is that I'm going to use my family as guinea pigs, and so I'm definitely not saying everything that I do is right or wrong. I'm not going to say that I've got it down pat because I definitely don't, especially those that know me and my children. So to put a bit of context on it, I actually have two boys that come to Padua right now, and I have a daughter who's just started her first year in teaching. So she went to a private girls' school where a lot of this programming I wrote around before the boys hit that age because I was having trouble with her. So it's important that we understand those philosophies where I'm coming from, but I'm going to try and make it realistic for you as well. So let's have a look at alcohol. I don't particularly, I know Chrissy put up some facts and figures before about the kids doing all those studies and all those sort of things and asking, I guess when we do any sort of facts and figures, it can be manipulated to whichever way we want to do. But there has definitely been some further study done by Guerin and White. So Guerin and White are seen as the leads when it comes to understanding children's behaviour. You know, one thing that we do know around alcohol is that the biggest problem to alcohol to teenagers is their parents. Whether they're watching parents utilise it and how they use it. Secondly, that they're being provided to it by parents to try it before they turn legal age. And third and most and more, it puts barriers up between parents staying connected with their children during important times. Now, what I mean by that is basically this, is that I have the opportunity to work with some pretty troubled kids and their families through some YMCA programs, and there's also a program called Aspire that works with young girls who have pregnant, had babies, but they're still trying to get through school. And I do a lot of programming with them and with their parents. And one thing I can tell you that resonates across all of them is that how parents' social life sometimes got in the way of not giving children a little bit too much freedom at night time, especially on weekends. You know, it was a lot easier for their friends to stay over somebody's place than you go pick them up at midnight at night because parents wanted to have those couple of drinks. The realisation is that, and we see that when children hit 18, the reason why we're having a huge alcohol violence issue and a huge drug issue with those 18 to 24-year-olds, there seems to be this magical switch that when a child turns 18, they're an adult. So as parents, we go, well, there's not much we can do, so we let them go. It's important that through this program that I'm going to show you tonight is that there shouldn't be that magical age. I've definitely met 21-year-olds who act like 15-year-olds. And I've definitely met some younger boys who are 15 or 16 that have the maturity far upon their ages. Again, it's about knowing individuals and what they need, but you can't put rules around them when they're 18 to 24. They already need to have subconscious behaviours that they just naturally feel that it's something that we do together. All right? To give you a bit of an idea what we mean by that, I want you to think about Life 360 app. Okay, Life 360 app is there for We can see where everybody is that has a phone within our family if they join our app. Does everybody know what Life 360 is? Okay. Children get hesitant where they want to turn that off, and it's because we use it the wrong way as parents. You know, they feel like they're being checked up on. It should be something that we utilise for them to feel comfortable in using us. So to give you a bit of an idea, if my son is, so I'll give you a real life story. Last year he went to the Sheffield Shield final at Allan Border Field. I asked him to text me when him and his mates were ready to be picked up. He texted me and said, "Dad, we're ready whenever you are." I just said, "No worries, mate." And we've built this thing up that I don't have to text him when I get there because he's watching me, I'm not watching him. I guess that's the way that we've kind of created that environment that it's him. I've embedded the seed that he's the one looking for the lift and all that. And it's not about time focused. It's not about you must be here at this time. It's all about, yep, mate, listen, you'll see when I'm leaving. Okay, they see where you are. They're preparing themselves for that engaged thing. So, but if we don't have that, we might ring a child and say, "I'm out the front, where are you?" And we know with teenagers today, or even when we were growing up, you think about when you're a parent, when you're having fun with your mates and all of a sudden you got this, "I'm out the front, where are you? Hurry up." You know, it didn't go over too well, and kids today are no different. And so we need to think about cycling, how we can use electronics to put a safe world around our kids where they don't feel like we're checking up on them. All right, and far too often we see that around our social media as well. Okay, so it's important that we don't do those things. Tobacco, I don't like figures around tobacco simply because we see all this marvellous information being put out there that's been driven by tobacco companies, that there's been a huge decrease, their education's working, all those sort of things, but we know that they're putting nicotine into their vapes. All right, they're just getting children addicted through small amounts of nicotine through vaping. And they're paying millions and millions of dollars to have people sell it to young children. And we'll have a look at that a little bit more when I hop into vaping later on, so you understand what we're talking about that. Illicit drugs. We know that there's been a small drop in the use of drugs. But to put it in a hindsight for you, we know that if we talk about party drugs, so LSD, all those sort of things, they talk about that on average in a school this size, 1 in about every 50 students would be identified as using one of those illicit drugs at least once a month. So if we roughly look at a school of 1,000, that's about 20 students per month using some sort of harsh illicit drug. Okay, and in my world, that's 20 too many at this age. So again, combating that with parents, so I always like to give a little snapshot about what we mean by how do we create something that we have to look for the early signs of where my child might be doing things that are a little bit more at risk. I gave you that scenario before about sometimes we allow alcohol as parents and socialising to get inability around what's easier to let our children do at night time. The other thing around that is about children giving us a false pretense that they're really enjoying being somewhere. I used to coach a lot of rugby league, and I'm still around that scenario a lot, and I often hear parents go to me, "Oh, yeah, the boys have a wonderful relationship. There's about 6 or 7 of them that meet at Johnny's place just about every Saturday night. They have crash over there just about every Saturday night." And that just sung off a million alarm bells to me. You know, why are they going to that house all the time? And 9 times out of 10, it's because their rules are more lenient. They're allowed to do more riskier things. A lot of the times we know that there's an older sibling there. If there's an older sibling, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years older than that group, they'll be there. The realisation is that that's the reason why those children picked that place. Why didn't they say, "Well, I want everybody to come to my place"? Because they know you're there and they know what your rules are in your household. So I guess when we're talking about harm minimisation, it is not saying that, no, you can't go there. What it's saying is that you need to make sure that the sleepovers don't happen. Because you're picking them up at a certain time, that means they know they can't have alcohol on their breath. They know they can't look like they're affected by something. We're just taking away some of those risk factors, but we're still allowing children to grow and have life skills. So it's not about wrapping children up in a cotton ball. It's about us making sure that we understand there's some steps that we can take to safeguard and educate our children about timely ways of being engaged with certain things. Does that make sense to everybody about what we're talking about? Now, cannabis, if Tony was here, I'm sure that he would provide you a whole heap of information around cannabis, but one thing that I can tell you, it is still one of the most concerning type of drugs that we have in our community, simply because we know that from a policing perspective, that you very seldom have anybody that starts off on ice or cocaine. They usually start off on a lot simpler drug like cocaine. The one thing that we do know about cocaine is that if they're a regular user of it, it usually takes you more and more to get the same sensation, and eventually the cost pushes you towards cheaper drugs like LSD and all those pill typing drugs where it's easier, one-off, you get the high very quickly, and we're not spending a lot of money around the smoking, and again, there's this concept that it's healthier. All right? Sporting people, especially if you young children now, those younger ages, what we're definitely seeing around elite sport or elite anything with younger children, they're training with older groups. Okay, so you know, whether it's under 16 cricket elite team, they're usually training with the A grade team at the club. They're being exposed to blokes aged between 18 and 24 all the time. Those drugs and alcohol are being spoken within that group all the time. All right? My boys can come up and tell me what drugs they could take that it would be out of their system if they had to do a drug test. They know that. It's all over their social media. The players they follow there, all those kind of things are there. So it's important that we understand that it's still one of the most dangerous types of drugs out there for children to be involved in, but from a parenting perspective, it's one of the easiest to smell. All right, around clothing and all that sort of stuff. So again, making sure that children come home at night. If I can give you one tip in the world, that would be it, is that, you know, if your children come home, we have some sort of idea about if there has been those drugs or alcohol involved. I mean, I want my children to try risk things. I mean, when I was growing up with my mates, I did some silly things. That's what growing up is all about. We don't want to hide that from young children, because unfortunately what we're seeing with the ages of 13 to 17, and I'm not here to get into that, is gaming. I mean, unfortunately, children lock themselves in rooms during those age groups where they're not experiencing life. They hit 18, they go out, they think they have life skills, they have a couple of drinks, don't understand what an argument is, and before we know it, becomes physical. Right? So it's important that we understand there's a huge amount of stuff impacting that age group, but one thing that we can kind of work on is making sure that those things that have odours around them, if we're seeing our children at the right time, we should be able to pick up on those things. When we talk about amphetamines and stimulants and all those sort of things, the worrying sign is that children are getting this mindset that they're turning to stuff like horse steroids. They have things they call Special K and all those sort of things, which are not illegal substances, but substances taken in enough will get them the high sensations. And the problem with that is that they're telling us that they don't think it's, because it's not illegal to have, it's not illegal to take, then they're allowed to do it. All right, I guess it's, we see some of those hallucinating drugs like mushrooms and all of those sort of things where people are actually growing them and using them as hallucinating drugs, and they're feeling they're not committing any offences. But unfortunately, when we talk about those type of drugs, the amount of damage that it does to people's brains very quickly is really, really devastating. The other thing about meth and amphetamines that you need to understand is that around how it makes people mentally unstable. One of the biggest things is that they feel like there's things inside them eating them up. That's why when you ever see somebody that's addicted to cocaine or ice or any type of serious drugs, you always see the sores all over them. That's because they're trying to scratch out what they think's inside them. That's part of that stimulus that they get inside them, that they're trying to get them out of them. So it's not because they're sore because it's unhealthy for their skin, it's actually them causing that. All right, so it's important that we understand all those sort of things. I'm not going to touch too much more on drugs with the hope that Tony's going to be here to, I don't want to steal his thunder, and he's the one with all the expert knowledge around that. But if he's not here, I'll definitely be able to answer any questions that you have around that. But the things that I specialise in is one is vaping. So this is what I'm going to basically talk upon, because we know that in Australia at the moment, it is the #1 growing risk-taking activity that children aged 13 to 17 are undertaking. In New Zealand, it has become such a problem that they talk about that 1 in every 8 children at school aged between 13 and 17 are using it at least once a month. That's huge numbers, and the reason why it's really important that you actually understand the dangers around it is because, one, it is one of the only things being imported into Australia that has absolutely no regulations around whatsoever. When cigarettes come into this country, they're regulated, so they're checked, they go through quarantine, they have all these specific checks done on them. Alcohol's the same. Every food that you put in your mouth goes through strict regulations. Vaping and the juice that they use, they can buy that off the internet. It's shipped from mainly China into Australia, and there is no regulations around it whatsoever. There is no minimum about what needs to be in it, anything. So what's put on those labels is only a label, and it's not being checked by anybody. The Australian government are aware of it, and it is on their list of things that they need to regulate, but unfortunately that's been put back now for some time because of all the health around COVID is taking up all their priorities when we talk about health. And unfortunately, that's allowing all of these processes and shops to come into our area. We've already got vaping forums. So if you type up vaping now online, you have forums. There's a newspaper now on an e-newsletter that goes out if you sign up on vaping, giving you the new flavours, what they do. We have 5 of the top 12 YouTubers online now for ages 13 to 17, now getting paid ridiculous amounts of money from tobacco companies to be using e-cigarettes on their live streaming, because they know how much that influences young children. So it's really, really important that we find a strategy that we're able to talk to young children about this, where they don't feel like that they're being told what to do. And so we're going to explore those things a little bit more. The biggest challenge that we have around vaping for young children is that they see it as social, harmless, and it's a trend. Every picture that you see of something to do with vaping is some person aged between 18 and 24 doing it. All right, they're dressed in the latest Nike gear, sporting gear, all of those kind of things. And it's really difficult for us to give them a reason for it not to be something that they should be doing. Okay, because they are told that it's harmless. In America, it's become such an issue that the American Health Organization has started to ban the sale of it in most stores. All right, and unfortunately the reason for that is that they felt firsthand how much devastation to young children vaping occurred. So in 2020, nearly 3,000 children across America died because their lungs collapsed because of vaping. They had no underlying medical conditions. The reason for that is the drugs that are in vaping. Every vaping juice that is brought into this country has formaldehyde in it. Formaldehyde eats your lungs. It's not like a cancer that gradually grows. It starts weakening your lung capacity straight away. When we talk about propane, iron oxides, all of those sort of things, that wonderful clear smoke that you see coming out of them, or the smoke, and they think that it's harmless, it's just toxins that have commercialised within the heating process within the e-cigarettes. But unfortunately, if we put these slides up, and I went into schools and I put these slides up, which I sometimes do, the realisation is that as adults, and if you've been smoking all your life, how often have you picked up a packet of cigarettes and seen those pictures of those awful lungs on the back of the cigarette box but become immune to them? How often can we show young boys accidents where people have wrapped themselves around poles because of speeding, but they still put their foot down? All right, there's a realisation amongst, it's a human trait that we think that it's never going to happen to us. So we need to think about different ways that we can get across our points for them to understand the harm that it's doing to themselves before it actually happens to somebody close to them, which usually stops them. All right, and that's what happens with adults. We don't usually stop our bad behaviour until someone close to us suffers from it, and then we really look at ourselves. Okay, and that human trait doesn't change for ages that we do know. And when I spoke about before about trauma-based behaviour in young children, that is all around alcohol and drug abuse. We talked about the Australian secondary students' alcohol. I mean, basically, mental health conditions were extremely high when we talked about how much they were being used around them. It was about masking their concerns and problems around, and it wasn't about schoolwork. It was around just the uncertainty of what they're going from school into. What's the world going to look like? Some people are seeing their families succeed at business because of COVID. Others are seeing their families being torn apart because of COVID. We have domestic violence at an all-time high within our community. The realisation is that we need to understand the impacts that all of those sort of things in children making decisions, because just like some people that turn to they're having a bad day at work, so we go make ourselves a coffee and go hide for 5 minutes, or we're having a bad week, so we can't wait to get home to that beer or that glass of red. Children look for their own ways of masking their pain. And so it's our ability as parents to pick up when our children aren't quite right, to know when's the right time to step in and how we step in. It's really, really important. And one of the biggest things I ask every parent to make sure that you have Instagram, understand who your children are following, make sure you're up to speed on their teams. If they're a sporting person, you know who they're following. You know what their favourite team is. You know when they're playing. I've got, my two boys love American sport, basketball and NFL and baseball. I know who their favourite teams are, and I follow them all the time. So when they hop into the car, when I pick them up in the afternoon here, I don't ask them how their day was, because I know what the answer is going to be. Good. All right, I don't worry about asking that question. The first thing when I hop in, I know what's happened in their world with their news. I'll tell them that, perfect example was yesterday, my son follows the Las Vegas Raiders and their coach got sacked. So as soon as he hopped in the car yesterday, it was me that said, mate, hop online and see what happened to your coach. All of a sudden, I'm in a conversation with him, and then that balls over to school, it might ball over to, and it was all around discrimination and all those sort of things. And he knows that I'm writing some courses about that at the moment, and that turned into those conversations. All I'm asking you to do as parents is that far too often with electronics, we put far too many rules around it, because the way we grew up, rules were A, B, and C with our parents. They had rules that were lines in the sand, and that was their rules, okay? And we try and apply that to anything electronic in a children's world. you struggle with that, because if you tell children they have to hop off their game at 11 o'clock at night, you have arguments every single time, because as a parent, we need to understand that if they hop off when they're halfway through a game, they lose levels, they get penalised, they must be in a game with friends, so it impacts them, and then they cop that socially. You know, it's important that we find a different way of having an A. Different ways of finding that is that, guys, we've hit 9 o'clock, can we make this the last game you've got coming up, it's your last game? And then as a parent, I need to be adaptive to know that that game could take 20 minutes if they're playing somebody really good on somewhere else in the world, or it could be an hour and a half. But that's about me being adaptive. But I need to be in that world to create that environment so they'll talk to me. So we just need to think about different ways of having those rules in our world. I guess I gave you one before about, you know, if you tell your child, I'm be out the front at 10 o'clock at night, be there, expect them to be disgruntled 9 out of 10 times. All right? But if we let them know, listen, we're going to leave home at 10, I'll give you a thumbs up when I'm leaving. It's like anything, it prepares them, it gives them time to think about what's happening and make the choices. They're going to talk to you about things more often. You know, one of the big things around drugs and alcohol and all those sort of things is that I look for those articles that involve those teams and people that they're interested in. Yes, not everybody's children are involved in sport and follow it as mad as mine do, but it's about just finding that concept. It's like online gaming. The way I handle online gaming isn't so much about it's too much, you're not allowed to have that much time today. You know, I've got them the interest in making videos out of their gaming. You know, thinking about a closed YouTube channel where they're making videos about what they've done. So they play for a while, but then they do editing, music to it, all of those sort of things, creativity that allows me to see that and be involved in that and take an interest in that. And then we need to drive a little bit more about grabbing their attention and taking them where we need to take them so they can be involved in stuff with us. But unfortunately, as parents in today's society, we are time poor. But it's up to us. We have to find that time. All right? You know, children are going to tell you that they're busy, they're tired, all of those sort of things, just like we did with our parents. But we need to make sure that we find the time for that. And a lot of the times when you sit here and go, I do, but I need to work, all of those sort of things, they're kind of subconscious behaviours that you've developed as well, and we call them intergenerational patterns. They're either derived from exactly what our parents did or what we didn't like our parents did, and we've become exactly the opposite. I mean, the realisation is, how often have you said something where you sounded exactly like your mum or dad as soon as you said it? That's intergenerational patterns. We do it all the time, and it's important that we understand the way parenting, our parents parent with us. We know that that doesn't work in today, because when I was growing up, especially at my age, we were seen and not heard. You know, if we had something to say, we'd have to ask to say it. Today, children are told right from a very young age that they have rights. We have early years childhood teachers now at the age of 3 having to ask a child if it's okay if they change their nappy before they do it. You know, whole children are getting told all this sort of stuff about they have a voice, they have a right, they have an opinion. And that goes against our subconscious beliefs that have been driven through those intergenerational patterns in a lot of us. So it's important that we understand those focal points and find a way of engaging with them. Resilience. One thing that I know about resilience with young children is that, and about youth, is that they get very clouded exactly what resilience means, because they see it changing everywhere within their environment. You know, they'll be around people that might see something they don't like, but they go with it anyway. You know, they have grey around a lot of rules. You know, and we see that within families all the time. You know, we see parents going, you know, you're not drinking, but here, try a beer, have a beer with me. Or, you know, one thing that resonates with me was one time that I took my daughter to SeaWorld during school holidays when she was a little bit younger, and we were lined up and we were behind a couple with a couple of young kids from Victoria, and they were just about at the front, and obviously they'd been going to all the theme parks, because when they got to the gate, the young boy turned to his dad and says, "Hey Dad, how old am I today?" Just to get in around the child's age and the things and like stuff. But all of that's doing from a very young age is that we're clouding children's ability to build resilience around things, because there's always a way out of things. We show them the easy way, we don't stick to our guns, all of those sort of things. And they're really important parts of being resilient. Now, they need to understand that as parents, we're not always going to be your best friends. You know, sometimes we do have to make a hard decision that you're not going to like. But it's important that they actually understand that, and that's how they grow resilience, by them understanding that we're not going to give in. The easiest thing that I see parents giving in on is electronics all the time. You know, and I'll be no different. I can count the amount of times that I used to say to my kids, and I probably still do if you ask them, "That's it, you've lost electronics for a week," because I was so frustrated, I didn't know what to say. And the next day they've mowed the lawn for me, did this, yeah, okay, there you go. All right. You know, it's important that we understand that resilience is a whole lot more than just their internal strength. They need to also learn a lot of that from us, and about how we can find a balance between our work and home is really important, because that's resilience as well. So it's really, really important that we understand those focal points. One of the things about resilience that can break very quickly is online. And it's really, really important that you understand that you need to understand the games and activities and the social media that your children are on. 90% of parents do not know where to find the open chat rooms in any game that their child's playing. 90% of children do not know how to log on to their kids' games. Don't know anything about them. The realisation I want you to think about, when you were growing up, everything that you did, your parents understood and were a part of, because it was very hard for us to hide from that. And the things that we could hide from them became our interests, and we did it a lot. And that's why kids are online a lot. It becomes their world because you're not involved in it. You know nothing about it, so they're more engaged with it. I was the catalyst for my boys to leave Fortnite. They don't play Fortnite anymore because I annoyed the bejeebers out of them because I was hopeless at it. I had the coolest skin in the world, but that's about all I could do. But they eventually moved on to another game to try and find another world that I wouldn't be into. But I'm still in them. I'm still there. All right? It's important that we understand you need to find the time to do that. We ask them to do a lot for us. Whether we like it or not, they do a lot for us. They have to go a lot of places with us. They have to do a lot of things with us. But it's important that every now and then we step back and we understand what's happening in their world and being part of that world. Because that's where your conversation pieces start from. And that's where you'll find a lot of these topics can be brought up and spoken about in a natural way. Because if you don't have that in with your child, then every time it comes, anything that you say now when they're aged between 13 and 17, remember I spoke about the order of where they get their information that they see as truth. So they go to their peers first, their teachers, their coaches, and then it's you. Now, I was lucky enough to play high-level sport, but my son's playing the same sport I did at an extremely high level, and now he's playing it. But if I have to get him his own personal coach, because the same personal coach tells him exactly what I told him, but he doesn't listen to me, he listens to him. All right? So it's really, really important that we understand those processes. The other thing, the biggest thing around children that start using drugs and alcohol and turn to vaping and all those sort of things is majority of the time it has been provided to them by their peers and they don't have their own brand. Your child struggles to identify who they are, and we class those children as followers. Now, I don't like that word because your child can be a follower but still have their own brand and know when to say no and know what's right and what's wrong. It's our job as parents to help our children understand who they are. Who do they want to be seen as? And unfortunately, social media has offered something to them that they don't understand, is that once they put something on there, it can never get taken away. All right? It'll always be found. You know, I'm a... can you just stop on that slide for a while? Thanks. It's really, really important that we understand that when we talk about parenting and branding, as an employer, and I'm part of this charity, but I also have my own business, and one of the things I do now when I'm employing anybody is that once I shortlist, the 5 people I'm shortlisting, I surf their social media. You know, we need to make sure that we're helping our children identify who they are. Okay? I always say that, you know, I look at my 15-year-old son now, and he is so much more mature than I was when I was 15. I mean, he's already making choices about what he wants to do when he leaves school and subjects. I was just happy if I could tie my shoelaces together when I was 15. You know, life was just all about mucking around with my mates and going to school, where these guys at this young age are already, you know, they're a lot older simply because of, you know, they've had to do things in different worlds to us. You know, my kids were part of that, those up to 12 years of age, who did spend more time awake with somebody else than my wife and I. The realisation is that's very true. We were both shift workers, both were in the police at that time, and we relied heavily on childcare and outside before and after school care. So they built those opinions and their branding from that school thing, but we need to make sure that that also incorporates into their own personal world, because that's where their troubles will come from. So you need to sit down with your children and make sure that they understand who they see. And the other person that needs to have a good look at themselves is us as parents. You know, I'm sure that I'm no different to every other parent here that, you know, I put so much energy and effort into work that when I get home sometimes I am just burnt, spent, tired, and then we have all the other pressures of training, sport, everything else. And it's hard to find that energy to perhaps, we look for easy outs sometimes when it comes to our kids. If they ask if they can go play on their electronics, sometimes it's that, sounds good, mate. Gives me that time to chill. So, you know, it's important that we look at ourselves and make sure that we're truly walking the walk, talking the talk. You know, are we finding a balance that our mental space is in a good space, that we are good parents? Are we finding the time for our kids when they really need us? And, you know, I'm talking a perfect world, and I know people we all have mortgages, we all have costs, we all have jobs that we have to meet. But just make sure that we also don't miss the moment, don't miss that minute. That can be that minute that you spend with your child that to them will mean an hour. You know, I always talk about finding that 5 minutes to yourself at the end of a day before you go into mum mode or dad mode. Most parents don't have that 5 minutes themselves. Your 5 minutes is your drive home. But all you're doing, you're still concentrating on roads, you're doing everything else. If you can get home and reset for 5 minutes, they talk about 7 minutes a day. It's a book. They talk about 7 minutes a day. That if you can find 7 minutes before you switch from work mode to parent mode, you'll do parenting a lot easier. Whether that's going out and playing with the dog, going for a walk, sitting down with a glass of wine, whatever it may be that you see as your 7 minutes, find it. Your 7 minutes isn't at 10:30 at night when everybody's gone to bed and you sit on the lounge going, what just happened? I've still got the dishes to do. You know, that is not your 7 minutes a day. All right? You know, sometimes we need to sit back and make sure we're simplifying ourselves to be able to provide our children what we need. One of the biggest challenges for us with youth, because they are so mature compared to what we are, we need them to also see things for what they are. You know, they put a lot of pressure on themselves to succeed. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to do well at school, or it's us putting that pressure on them. the realization as a parent, we also need to sit back and say, as long as my child's effort is there, and they're understanding the value of life about putting in effort, there's always ways of getting them to where they need to be if they're not quite succeeding at that point in their life. If they're in grade 8 and it's not all happening just yet, it doesn't mean that it's the end of their world, and we need to make sure they don't see it that way. Right? Mr. Elmer always says it's a journey. It's young men, and truly we need to make sure they see it that way. That the expectations that we drive upon them isn't something that they see it that it's far heavier than it should be on them. So it's important that we understand those things. The other thing about families, we might see ourselves as normal, all right, but inevitably sometimes children at certain ages, wherever they may be, might not see you as the cool dude anymore, all right, or the person that they want to spend the most time with. And as a parent, that can be really struggling. You have to find ways and means around that. I find, if I use myself as a perfect example, I had 2 young boys. We have a fishing boat, and they would always come out with me. But now it's, I've got this on, Dad, I've got to get to this training, I've got to do that, I've got this on, I want to sleep in the morning, I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. to go fishing. And it took me a long time to know that that wasn't personal. So it's about us understanding that. I guess my tip for you is that if you're finding parent difficult, you're doing a great job. All right, if you're waking up every day and life's cruisy, home's cruisy, work, family's cruisy, there's usually something you're missing. And that's being totally honest. One of the things that we have to find a balance for our children too is sleep, rest, and food. There's no doubt the demands on students who want to do everything at a school is quite demanding. Sometimes they're here at 6:45 in the morning for training, and then they're doing their all their schoolwork, and then they might go to the Learning Nest after school, and then they go straight from that to club training. It becomes a very long day for them. And it's important that we're making sure that they have the right things in their lunch boxes. It's the simple things that will let them make good choices. Because if they start getting tired, if children don't have the energy here at school, they get tired, then they look for ways, they can't concentrate as well, they tend to gravitate towards other children that are doing the same thing, they form bad relationships with the wrong crews, and then they get introduced to stuff that they're not in a good mental place to be able to have the strength to make the right decisions around. And again, that comes back to us. And on the online world, there are online dietitians out there that do it for free for you. If you've got a child doing a lot, jump online, say what you're doing, and they'll come back and give you a free thing. If you've got private health cover, it covers all of that. But it's about us finding the time to make sure our kids are actually eating and doing the right thing. So it's about you making the right choices at the right time with our kids and giving them those things that they need to make decisions. Because the realisation is that 90% of their life they're not with you. So that 10% that they're with you, we need to guide them into those good decisions around food, water, exercise, sleep, and you knowing how to start a conversation with them. And starting a conversation with teenagers today is starting off in their world, not your world. Okay? And that happens everywhere. Doesn't matter what we're doing, they're all starting off in their world first. It's all about them. But you know what? When we were growing up, it was pretty well all about us too. Things haven't changed. We just see it differently and they see it differently. One of the biggest things that we need to talk about is having fun. All right. Usually I'd be walking around stage trying to do a few activities, but I've got to stand behind this thing because we're going live everywhere. But it's really, really important that we are having fun, that we do laugh. You know, whether we're sitting here tonight, you've made the effort to come here, but I can guarantee you're thinking about all the stuff that's put you back at home. All right, and sometimes we just need to let that go a little bit. I have a saying that I always like to use, it's going to be there tomorrow. And one of the things I always say to my employees is that, and coming from the police service, and I mean this wholeheartedly, I say to them, they go, oh, I'm not going to get that done today. And I go, it's okay, no one's going to die. All right, it's okay if you leave work at a reasonable time to go home, because tomorrow, it's there and nothing's happened overnight that's caused those dishes to, you know, and all those sort of things. And it's about us having that flexibility in our world to understand that. I always put up a slide for the boys or girls that I'm talking to when it's youth and say, it's called Help Your Mates. I can put up the same slide for you, but it's not about you helping your child's mates. It's about knowing your child's mates and their families. You know, one of the things I am very strict on when my boys find and are engaging with another family or with boys, I get to know those boys and I meet their parents. You know, I don't ask for phone numbers because all of a sudden they mention Greg at school, but you know, if I start seeing that, you know, they're starting to do a lot of them or going to parties and that sort of stuff, I take the time to introduce myself. I take my time to get a feel from those people. And by doing that, I also get to know a little bit about their mates as well. All right, I'm very lucky. My Year 10 son has a great bunch of mates. Wonderful families, in my eyes, they're wonderful families. They seem great kids. But I also know those kids, got to know them. And there's a couple of boys there that I know when they get their driver's license, they're going to be the risk takers. So when that time comes, I'm going to be already starting to put things in place when I'm talking to my son around when they're in those situations around who they're getting lifts from and which cars they're jumping in, and if they're in their cars, what are they going to do? But I'm going to talk to them way before that happens. All right, and I guess what I was getting from that message is that you need to be on the front foot and know what's happening before it happens. I want you to have the art of manipulating your child to get them to do exactly what you want them to do without them realising it. All right, I always try and think about that task because that's what I guess I always try and give hints to teachers as well. Try and manipulate parents to get them to do exactly what you want them without them realising it. By you knowing what behaviours they're going to come across before they come across them. Give them the information before they are aware of it's going to happen. All right, you've had life skills. Yes, you might not know the ins and outs of everything that they do, but you know how to communicate. You should know what they're into, what they're things that they're really passionate about, and find a way of engaging with them. And if you can do that, then I can guarantee you that you'll be able to pick up on when things aren't quite right. And I always get asked, when do I know my child and things aren't quite right? My answer to you is that I don't know your child. I don't know that answer. You should. The realisation is that we know that if a child's all of a sudden not sleepy, cranky with you, I mean, I've got a 13-year-old, he's nearly 6'3". He weighs the same as me and he's only just turned 13. The realisation about that is that when he'll get cranky, and we've just worked out it's almost like that testosterone dump sort of process, but we're also taking that time to really make sure that we're just checking his messages and his chat rooms and all that to make sure it's nothing else in that world. We're doing catch-ups with him around what he's doing with his mates and all those sort of things. We're asking other parents just to, has anything happened with the boys' groups that we're not aware of, and all those sort of things. It's about, never want you, as a parent, we never really start thinking the worst, but it's always in the back of our mind. And believe me, as an ex-police officer, I always think the worst straight away. All right, especially somebody that was around child abuse for so long, I'm always thinking the worst. But it's important that we're level-headed around it. But you know your children. You'll know when things aren't quite right. Don't put it down to, they're just going through that time, or they're 15 and they just don't want to talk to me anymore. There has to be a reason why that started, and it's our job to try and find out what that is. And rebuild that way that they see us as somebody that's there just to discuss general stuff with. All right, but you have to do that through their interests and know what they want to know about, not what you want to talk to them about. So that last slide that was up there is all for you guys. As a parent, children are going to push you to the limits. They're going to push the boundaries of all your emotions. But there is one thing that we can always show them, is that unwavering love. They'll definitely know the difference when you're disappointed with something that they did, or you're not happy with something they did, but they should always be able to feel that unwavering love. And we just need to, as parents, finding a way that we can deliver that to them. But again, I've been to far too many conferences, and I've heard the experts hop up and give the 10 steps to doing that. But we're stereotyping what a child is by doing that. The realisation is that your child is unique, just like you are. I'm sure if you really think about it, you know what the buttons are that make sure you can push on your child to make things happen. Find them, use them. And I guess the last one there is courage. When your child comes home and goes, "You won't let me do this, but Johnny's dad lets him do that," have the courage to know that just because you have a different standard to another parent doesn't make your standard wrong. You have to have courage around to do that, otherwise we give in. And then our children are growing up by everybody else's life standards and choices, rather than what, as parents, is supposed to be our legacy that we pass on to children. And I'm sure we're all here that you can think about things that your parents passed on to you that you don't use, or you didn't agree with now as adults. But the realisation is most of it we did. All right. I was hoping Tony would be here by now. I know, he's let me down drastically. No. I guess I'd much rather now, if people have got specific questions and want to know something that perhaps I can help them with, or put you onto somebody who can, I guess that's where I think it'd be much valued at now, spending a little bit of time. So I know that we're live, so Christy has a mic. So
I'm just curious with the vaping, actually, how if it has something in it that eats up your lungs, like you were saying, why isn't there more done to prevent it just being openly available to anyone? And I mean, I walk down the street in the city and there's vapors all over the place, and I have that
and you're
stream of
breathing
stuff
it in.
coming over me as I walk down the street. So I wasn't aware that there was something in it that was really bad for you. I thought it must be perfectly safe.
No.
So I'm just curious.
To highlight how bad it is, if you go to the Australian Lung Foundation and every medical board, Australian medical thing, all their papers at the moment are the dangers around vaping and the damage it's doing instantly to lung walls and cavities. They think that they're going to have an absolute, one of the next huge medical conditions that we're going to have is emphysema. and it's going to be of really young people aged 30 to 50 because their lungs have completely gone because of vaping. And the problem is, I was lucky enough in the April school holidays to be able to go to New Zealand for a week between that short window of borders being open and closed. And I took the family there, and I can tell you right now that every second corner had a vaping store, and it looked like a lolly store. Inside they had free karaoke machines where youth could go in and sing. They had all the vaping stuff there, and everywhere you turn there was kids vaping. And we're seeing schools take some huge steps and spending huge financial issues around that. I know of 3 high schools in Brisbane where they only have 1 toilet block open now for the whole of school, and a teacher standing outside those toilet blocks all day because of the vaping going on in those schools. The realisation is that it is our next major issue with our youth, and we have enough. I haven't even looked at gambling or spoken about gambling. Vaping is something that if there's a conversation that you're going to have with your child, have it now.
Thank you. So my question was to do with these behaviours and mitigating strategies. So if we assume that in this room, half of us are going to discover our children doing something that we'd rather they didn't, be it drugs, alcohol or vaping, in the next, say, 6 months, what would you say is the most likely successful approach to addressing that with them? If you're telling me that the vaping issue, the messaging they're getting is so obviously, in fact, we understood that it was safe. I had no idea about the formaldehyde issue either. So if it was drugs, alcohol or vaping, what would be the first thing you'd say to a child when you went, oh my gosh, this is what you're doing? So if you were to catch a child, I shouldn't say catch, discover your child doing something you really didn't want them to do, and the stats are that in the next 6 months half the room is likely to do that, what would be the first thing you'd say to them that would set you up for a successful path to leading them away from that behaviour?
I guess that I'm going to answer it really truthfully. I could give you the textbook sort of stuff, but I guess truthfully is that I'm going to have to try and deal with my anger and disappointment. As a parent, that's our biggest thing, and they see that. So it's about making sure that we give them time to focus on that. I think time sometimes is your biggest thing. That was my son. If I got let's say it happened at school, got a call from Christy, your son's been caught vaping. I'd come up, pick up my son. I wouldn't say too much when I got home, in the car. When I got home, I'd say, I'm just too disappointed to talk to you at the moment. I need you just to go, I need my space for a sec. And then I'd come back and sit down, and I'd just go through to them and ask them, I know that we know that you're vaping. There's no use me asking you why. I just need to know what it was that made you think that it was okay, and why, what's happening in your world that made you think that you needed to do that. I think I'd go down that mental side of stuff rather than, why'd you do that? I think you think about if anybody asks you that question, why'd you do that? Why'd you get drunk? I had too many. How do you, it's all about making sure that we don't lose our, they know you're upset. The less of you can show it, I guess the better it's going to be, because they're already fearful about what your reaction's going to be. There's no secret that a lot of kids will, be scared of going home. They'll say, Dad's going to lose it, Mum's going to lose it, I don't know what's going to happen, and all those sort of things. So it's important that they understand those processes. And the same thing is that discuss with them before it happens. What what would happen if you got in a situation and you tried it and I found out about it? How do you think that conversation would go? If you've got a child that's a risk taker, you're going to have to make sure that you're in those positions where you're asking those questions a lot. If you've got a child that's one of those children that want to try things, they're a risk taker, they always are, it's important that you're a step ahead of them. Mate, I know these things are out there at the moment and you bring it up when you're watching a YouTube with it, and mate, or you're walking down the road and you see the vaping. We might as well have the conversation now. I think that, sometimes children are so anxiety. I've got one of my boys is anaphylactic to toxins, drugs, all those sort of things. So he's so fearful about he'd die instantly if he tried anything. That's not who my risk-taking child is when it comes to that. So the conversations change a little bit, right? My oldest son this afternoon said to my wife, "You're the scariest person I know. If you tell me not to do something, I'm never doing it." So, I don't know if that's the greatest sort of process, but it's quite funny how you look at, I would never thought of my 15 or 16-year-old having that response when we talked about vaping. So it's funny how those processes happen. But don't be mad. All right, they already know you're mad. By you doing that, it doesn't, yes, there will be consequences, but let them set their consequences. Have the discussion with them about, what's going on in your world, where are you at? What effects does that have? And then, once you sit down with them and they've opened up to you and realise all that sort of stuff, then we can talk to them about, well, mate, where to from here? Part of resilience is understanding that if we do something that's wrong or we risk doing something, then there has to be consequences around what we do. It's like speeding. There's a consequence that I could get a ticket. There has to be some sort of consequences. And setting those, just remember, I always say to parents that if you let your child set their own consequence, I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, it'll be harder than what you're setting. If your child asks to go to a party and you say, "Oh mate, oh no, I don't like you going to that party," but if you say to them, "Listen, if I was to let you go to the party, what would be your rules?" They'll go, "You can drop me off, pick me up, I'll give you the parents' phone number, if there's any alcohol, I'll give you a call, blah, 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 blah." And then I'll go, "Okay, so if that's when I let you go, that's your rules around that. What's the consequences if I find that you've broken one of them? Or I'm not allowed to go to another party, I'm grounded for 3 months." That's when I just stop the recorder. I've got it. No. Okay, but allow them to set their consequences, because if they break it, who can they come back on? They're not going to yell at you and all of a sudden say, "You're treating me like a 5-year-old, you're treating me like a 10-year-old, Johnny's allowed to do that stuff." They set them. Let them have that voice.
So just understanding more about the vaping side of it, the smoke or whatever that comes from that, is that just as toxic as normal cigarettes? I work in an area where, the vaping that they do can tend to blow in your face and things like that. Is that just as bad for you?
It's not as bad. I guess it's like cigarette smoke. It has the toxins. So it has the formaldehyde, all those sort of things. It's a cocktail of toxins.
Can I just ask, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer then, knowing this about vaping, what is the school's stance on vaping when they do catch the boys vaping?
So, obviously, with what's occurred in a very short period of time, so being new to Padua this year, and one of my questions to Peter when I started, and I think Peter says that I brought it with me, but anyway, I asked, is there an issue with vaping in the school community? Peter's answer was no. What are you talking about? I said, oh, fantastic. And it wasn't long before we started to see, obviously with social media and what young people are doing, it coming into our community. So the school has taken some steps, well, a number of steps. One is education. So the House Guardians and myself did an education program with all of our students. I actually broke it into stages because what I thought was what Year 7 needed was different to what Year 12 needed. And I called upon Paul Dillon, who's one of a leading drug, alcohol professional that upskills teachers and parents, and was able to get some of his resources as well. We did that really early in the piece, and we've continued to do education pieces around that. We have obviously consequences for vaping, and they're evolving consequences because what we're seeing is the differences, and I'm learning as well around the vapes. So you can also see that there's disposable, there's nicotine, non-nicotine, things like that. But we're just taking the stance that yes, there's a suspension from school, an external suspension from school. If we start to see a pattern of that, so more than the one time, then that's where we start to have those serious conversations as well. Recently, and it's being rolled out, the boys are aware of it, we've put our environmental sensors into our bathrooms. So that's come at a fairly big cost to the school budget, but it's something that we have thought is really important for us. So those notifications will come to the House Guardians and to myself, and we're able to, one, monitor what's occurring in the bathrooms, because that's where we hear that it's happening the most. It's hard in regards to when you have 10 boys in the bathrooms at that time. So what we're doing is contacting home and saying our environmental sensor, the vape index, was elevated when your son was in the bathrooms. Yes, we've been able to pinpoint specifically certain students as well, and obviously had that conversation and issued those consequences. One of the things that Michael mentioned is around, one, education. I also like to get the boys to go through, well, yes, there's a consequence, but I want it to be a learning experience, especially the first time. It needs to be a learning experience. So having that conversation with the parents, the boys will do a report, and as Michael said, when I say to them, what do you think the consequences are? 9 times out of 10, I'll be expelled from the school. Okay, hang on, let's work back from that. And the parents are very supportive. One of the other things that we're working through is vapes. I don't think Michael put up a picture, but they come in little highlighters, in USBs, so they're very hard to detect. So the boys in the bathrooms, you can say when they come out, empty your pockets, but they're not that silly, okay? They will put them into their DACs, or they will dispose of them before they come out. So definitely it's time consuming. I'm being 100% honest with you. It's time consuming. It's concerning, and especially with the chemicals that are in these vapes. And the boys do not realise, as Michael said, we can educate them, we can show them the effects that it will have, but they don't have the realisation that that will happen to them. So again, we're working with the experts. I know Michael works with schools in regards to that, upskills our teachers to be able to effectively deal with that. I hope that answers your question. Can you smell it on them? Some yes, some no.
They're using like mango flavour or strawberry, sometimes you can.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and with the nicotine stuff, the research coming out of it, like when the stuff comes into Australia, about 60% of it will say it's non-nicotine. Out of that 60%, about half of it has nicotine in it. Just about all of it has nicotine, some sort of level of nicotine in it. Because it's owned by the cigarette companies. They're the ones piling it onto the market because they're trying to get, when kids turn 18 to 24, they're turning to cigarettes. Sorry?
Cannabis.
No. Well, you could. So they call it, so there's a thing called lolly drugs. So that can be where they do look at making mixtures of speed and all that sort of stuff into vaping juices, and so they mix stuff, and I have no doubt that that'll become something that'll be big on the marketplace as well. And unfortunately, as a parent, it's really difficult to think. And the jewels, what they call, you're talking about the lighters and all those sort of stuff, they look like highlighters, they're really thin, they're USB charged. It's really difficult to pick up on them. I mean, if you tipped your child's pencil case out and you weren't really looking, you'd think it's a highlighter half the time.
Just a quick one. Like, we use the word formaldehyde, and most people would think, okay, what's that do? So do we educate people in, okay, this chemical, what it actually does to our brains, what it does to our cells, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, and I guess history has shown us, haven't we done that with tobacco, with people's lungs for how many years, that we show what it does to it, but people still eat it. We show what alcohol can do to our brain and all that sort of stuff, but we still do it. It's the education, like if you Google now vaping, the amount of information out there and the amount of organisations out there trying to get people to not use it is overwhelming. There's pages upon pages of it now, but there's also pages upon pages in that youth world on their social platforms that are showing them how great it is. And that's where they are. They're not Googling it, they're on their social media.
I've got a question too. On your earlier slide, I think energy drinks were listed. I just want to know, are they as dangerous as what we've just been discussing? And then how many energy drinks would we be talking about before?
Yep.
You know,
one of the biggest concerning energy drinks that we're seeing is that you're seeing those boys bring those little packets that they're getting offline, they're getting online now. They come in 12 packets of thin packets and they add it. If you Google what's in them, you'll be scared. Again, they're not regulated. They've got high sensors stuff in it. They've got things that they use in LSD in them. They're all there to give them a quick buzz. But again, people just see, oh, it's an energy drink. We're all good. Well, again, it's about us as parents making sure that we're doing our research on energy drinks.
So I tried to do some research, just ranking Coke, Mountain Dew, and then the Monsters and the Red Bull and the V. I'm not sure. They are just all available at Coles. And so I cut off the supply myself, but he can just go to Coles after school and get one. Like, when's the problem? If he's having one every day? If he's having just one on the weekend? Like, those are ones that are in a supermarket. They're not the ones you're ordering from the internet. I can read the ingredients on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, is that energy drinks is about you making sure that you do your own research and have your own opinion on them. Asking my opinion, I don't think that there's any real need for any youth to be taking any type of energy drink, unless they're, they might have a Powerade after playing sport or something. But the actual energy drinks, I don't see any reason that their body is already at a fairly good level. They don't need to be. It's like them taking, like us when we were studying, that all of a sudden we thought there was this craze about taking no-dos and all that sort of stuff to keep us awake. Or drinking lots of coffee, and coffee's becoming a big thing with young teenagers now. Like, I never even looked at coffee when I was in year 11 and 12. Now it just seems like schools have cafes that are selling it. So Again, it's a craze, and it's very well marketed to them. You know, and on them, when you read it, 18 plus, but everybody sells it. So, sorry? Okay, so, no, they get nothing out of vaping. And you know what? That's my question to kids that do vape. So, when we were at one of the programs I do with the YMCA is that I give the 15 youth that are in the program, they'll all be vaping, and I'll ask them, so can you tell me alcohol, who's drunk alcohol? Yep. Write down what you get out of alcohol. What feelings do you get? They write them down. I ask them, what feelings do you get out of marijuana? They write it down. I say, okay, write down what feeling you get out of vaping. They can't write anything down. Somebody might go, oh, it tastes the taste. And I said, well, grab some chewing gum. It's exactly the same. Absolutely. It's cigarette. There's cigarette companies piling billions of dollars into vaping because that's where their next fortune's coming from. It's funded by them, owned by them.
Any other questions?
How effective are the environmental sensors so far? Are they working quite well, do you think, or?
So the environmental sensors have been switched on since the start of the term. I feel, and the stats are showing me with the amount of notifications that are coming through, they are lessening each day. It is, as you mentioned, being parked out the front of toilets. Yes, it's, as I said, it's time consuming. But the boys need to get a message, and our duty of care is to keep your sons safe and the school community safe. So there's a number of schools that have taken the environmental sensors on board, and especially in Sydney. So before we even put them into the bathrooms, I had contacted some schools that I knew of that had put them into their bathrooms. In a perfect world, I'd just redesign the toilet block, but we've got the construction that we have, so we need to work in that perimeter. So yes, the boys know they're in there. And what we're also looking at is the psychology of the brain as well, so around some signage, because when you look at signage, and someone suggested to me today, Christy just put, you're being watched, and I said, I can't put that in a bathroom. And they went, oh yeah, you can't put that. So just around some monitoring signage at that eye level height to help with that brain psychology as well. So like I said, the pastoral team are working extremely hard. We'll continue to do so. Are we going to catch all of them? No. And it's about being in partnership with the parents as well. So you having that conversation at home, being on that front foot, and then us as well being here to educate your sons, but then also make sure that we're creating that safe environment.
I was just wondering through Padua, is there like an anonymous way that they can advise if their friends are doing it or whatever? And I know you're saying about peer support and things like that, it's very important. I know if my son was to, dob on one of his mates or whatever, that's not really cool at all, and that would, he'd be in more trouble for that. So is there an outlet for them? Are they taught on, maybe have a chat to your friend and go, this is uncool, but then what is the next step for them?
That's a great question. So the boys are taught around being that proactive voice for their mates as part of the presentation that the House Guardians did. There's not an anonymous way at the moment, but the boys are trained to send an email to their House Guardian, and I get them as well. I'm concerned about my mate with this. Can you please not mention my name? And of course, we don't mention names. We never mention names when we're investigating or going through an incident. So the boys are trained in that. They're trained in the bullying and the student protection. They send their emails to the email addresses, and then we go through that. So to me, the boys do seem quite comfortable to come forward. It's more your older boys that will say, I'm really concerned about such and such. It's that 9 and 10 category that we need to work on. Yeah, because you can't snitch on a mate.
Is there a particular year level or age group that you've noticed where the vaping problem is most prevalent?
If I look through statistics and I look at our data, I would say year 9 upwards. Okay, that hasn't ruled out our year 7 and 8s, but it's our year 9 and upwards. And if I look at particular year groups, yes, I can give data around that, but definitely our year 9 onwards. So sorry to anyone that's got boys in year 9 upwards.
Sorry, I have 2 questions. The environmental sensors, do they only pick up the vaping? Or what else do they pick up? So deodorants, all those sort of things, other things. And I guess in terms of, the boys have obviously a lot greater knowledge than we do, you do. I know my boys have said they know exactly where to get the vapes from. They know exactly where to get the things from. How can the school tap into that knowledge to be effective?
2 good questions. The environmental sensors actually pick up a range of things. So the deodorants, if you were here on Monday, you would have noticed myself and another house guardian spraying deodorant directly at the sensor just to see what alerts we got, because even though the company have gone through the training with us, we wanted just to check it out ourselves as well. So I can't remember the exact long name of it, but it will come up in an index with the deodorants. It does noise, humidity, temperature, the vape index, and there's another one. So I can see, I've got monitoring on my laptop, same with the house guardians, and when the alerts go off, I can see which alert it was, and it will also pull some camera footage from the last people to enter into the bathrooms from the outside cameras. So not from the inside of the toilet block, but if you notice, we've got lots of security cameras, so it will pull those footage, and you can see there. So yes, the deodorants will give us an alert, but it's a different alert to a vape index. Around the inside knowledge, our boys know more. When I did the presentations up for the house guardians to present, I actually went to a couple of our senior boys and our student leaders to say, is this hitting the mark? Student voice is really important. They have particular areas, and I've given information to police around shops that they will purchase from. So we're being proactive in that space. And definitely, as I find, as the boys get older, in year 12 especially, they care about their mates quite a lot, and they will come and tell us. And they also care about Padua, which is a lovely place to work in. And they will say, Miss, you need to be aware of this. Miss, you need to be aware of that. So yeah, we do have a culture, and it's a culture that's been created over many years where they do feel comfortable. If you look at the PC Centre, the day in, day out traffic of that, boys wouldn't know that they're coming to tell about something around that information. They know that it's a busy place. They're there for various reasons, so they don't put those things 2 and 2 together. So yes, I've had lots of boys come and tell me, especially before we had the sensors, Miss, you need to go down to the bathrooms. And it's hard because we have obviously child protection rules in place. So for staff to enter, have to have 2 staff members announcing that you're entering. Okay, so that obviously alerts the boys, and they will dispose of or hide the vapes, and they're very little, so quite easily able to do so. I hope that answers everything. Yeah. Jason, I'll hand over to you for the thank you.
There's been a lot of information, and as a parent sitting here, I've really reflected on some of that information. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Michael and Tony in his absence for the presentation tonight. There are a couple of things that really hit me. Getting your child to listen to you is not easy. We've all had those conversations, and it took me a long time because I don't play video games. So that idea of talking about the language of with your son, I don't play video games. I find them boringly annoying. So when I say go to bed and they say, but I've got to finish my level, it took me about 3 years to understand that. You talked about this notion of making sure that we think about ourselves as kids. Our parents had rules, and that idea of allowing our children choices and allowing our children to have some control of those choices. And you talked about the art of getting them to do what you want to do. And isn't it always about choices? It's about giving them 3 choices, all of which you want them to do, and allowing them to pick that choice. You talked about that idea of being present with them, and I have to be honest, I come home from work and I love to cook, and my son loves to cook, and I tell you what, I just want him to bugger off so I can get it done in 10 minutes, and the last thing I want to do. So I will be more present moving forward and making sure I let him come with me. So I guess I'll take that 7 minutes and get changed slowly, and then come out and we'll cook together, because it does frustrate me, but I'll get better at it. You talked especially, and I think this is where I'll end before we say a final thank you, you talked about looking for behaviours, you talked about looking for those signs that your children aren't doing okay, and looking at how we can step in and help them and when we can step in and help them. And I think as parents we know our kids really well and we know those signs, and we have to, I guess what I heard was get better at really listening to them and hearing them. And you talked about being adaptive with our rules. And especially with boys, it's really important that sometimes there's a rule here, but sometimes we've got to be a little bit flexible and adaptive with our rules. So some really good messages there, and thank you very much. We have a gift. So Kevin's going to come up and present a gift. At this point, if we can thank everyone at home and everyone that was here, and while Kevin's coming up, if we can give a big round of applause.
Just on behalf of the Parents and Friends Association and all the parents here, I'd just like to ask you the question, how lucky are we to have teachers and school leaders like Christy and Jason and all the others here. And thank you very much to Sue Weston as well, who's put together all of this event for us this evening. And thank you, Tanya, for your work in the background as well. It seems only right, because you came here. The Good Choice program is a fantastic charity, didn't charge us a fee, and we thought that was not right. And so Michael will be taking away a donation of $500 from the PNF as a sign of our appreciation of the great information he shared with us today. Thank you very much, Michael.